to early childhood development? Wisdom, stature, favor with God and man, that social development, and even that spiritual development. Isn't that amazing? How God in His wisdom designed this. So what we're going to do, if you guys are okay with this, are you guys up for a quiz?
Yes.
Yeah. Sure.
Is that okay? All right. Okay, here we go. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then we'll see how you do. Please, this is not a collaborative effort, so just keep your answers to yourself. All right, here we go. So question number 1. During what period in a child's life does the brain develop fastest? Okay, I think that's kind of a giveaway, but that'll be the easy one, okay? All right, so jot that down somewhere. Okay, question number 2. By the time a child is 5 years old, what % of their brain has developed? Okay, there's a trick question at the end. Yeah. All right, next one. During the early years, the brain can develop at 700, 100,000, 1 million neural connections per second. Okay. Next, which parenting style best promotes a child's faith and brain development? All right. You guys are getting quiet on me here. Okay. Can I move on?
Yeah.
And lastly, there's a new nurturing care framework that's come out globally, and it has several components. And I want to find out, what are the components of that nurturing care framework? Maybe just jot down the ones you think are the right ones. You there? Give you a few seconds. All right. Good. You guys done? Got it all? 100%?
Yeah.
Not sure?
Lock
Okay. All right. Well, let me start answering some of these questions. Okay. We know that, well, the research tells us that the first few years of life are, in fact, the most critical years in a child's development. And the reason for that is because the brain is developing incredibly quickly. And the answer to that question is, in fact, by the age of 5, 90% of the brain has developed. 90% of the wiring, the architecture is actually being established so that the child can now grow. That's incredible. Often this is a time when, well, blah, 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 the child's, what are they learning? What are they doing? Can't wait for them to get to school. And yet by 5, often before school, they're actually already, a lot has happened. Yeah. And we know that in the first few years of life, until recently, it was believed that a child could even develop up to 700 neuronal connections. These little wires, connecting in the brain. Harvard's come out with a more recent study that shows that up to 1 million connections can be made a second. When the child gets the right nurturing and stimulation, this is what's going on in their brains. Isn't that amazing? You look at a 2-year-old and you're like, what is this child doing? And yet these connections are happening at an incredibly quick rate. And I wanted to show you a picture of these neuronal connections. And here you've got a child's brain at term, before they're born, and then newborn, and you can see the density of these connections increasing. And during this time, a child's brain is very much like a sponge. It's craving stimulation and positive experience. And in fact, it's those positive experience or negative that affect brain development in an incredible way. When a child gets that loving and nurturing that they need, those connections happen and they last. When they don't, you lose them. And so you can see by the age of 2, they're very dense connections. And then what happens is there's a pruning are these connections. Connections that are not used, it's kind of use it or lose it. And you get a pruning effect, and only those that have been used remain. Does that make sense? And so this is such an important window of opportunity that we have to really influence the future of the child's development, how they do in school, and in fact, not only their intellectual well-being, but even their physical well-being. It's become so important that now journals like The Lancet and others are, have actually stressed the importance of this. And we now, for those who've heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, there is a Sustainable Development Goal specifically for early childhood development, and that's SDG 4.2. So there are massive benefits to early childhood development. The return on investment is massive. We know that when children get quality ECD, early childhood development, it reduces all sorts of things: crime rates, pregnancy rates, welfare costs, but it also increases success in school, graduation rates, workforce readiness, job productivity, etc. So this is the time to invest. Invest early is what the research is telling us. I mentioned the Nurturing Care Framework. So last year, World Bank, UNICEF, and many other international organizations got together and they produced something called the Nurturing Care Framework, which really is based on research and gives us an idea of what are the key ingredients necessary for a child to thrive. Whether they're here in San Diego, or in Santiago, or Johannesburg, where I live, in Soweto, what are those key ingredients? And the research says that when children get these 5, adequate nutrition, responsive caregiving, safety and security, opportunities for early learning, and good health, they will thrive. So did you get those 5? Good job. Okay. So we'll talk a little bit more about this framework in a second in the context of parenting. Okay, what's happening here? All right. You know, the reality, though, is that in middle and low-income countries, over 250 million children are not going to reach their potential because of extreme poverty and stunting. And when I talk about stunting, is a child that's not at its right height for its age. So we're seeing more and more of these children that are malnourished, and because of that, that leads to stunting. And we know that stunting has a direct correlation on brain development. So you can imagine all this lost potential because children just don't have the opportunity to get the nurturing and the nutrition and the stimulation. I'm going to quickly just talk about the South African context where I live. And the reality is that 25% of young children in our country go to bed hungry every night. 25%. They're going to school hungry. We had a situation where a preschool teacher was asking children, what did you have to eat today? And one of the children said, it wasn't my turn to eat. I mean, how do you go to school? How do you even learn when you're struggling, with starvation and hunger? Again, in South Africa, 25% of children are stunted. That means they haven't received the right nutrition. They may have received a lot of carbohydrates and other, foods, but they haven't received the right. So by the age of 2, 25% are already stunted. We also know that 25% of poor children have access to preschools. So the first time they see a school is at the age of 5 or 6. So those years of brain development have been lost. Mom's often trying to find work or they're at home. And so this is a huge crisis. And we know that more than 25% of children under the age of 5 don't get to read at all. Just imagine the impact on that child's life going forward. And sadly also there's very little in place to help parents know what to do in order to stimulate children. And so as Hope Worldwide, what have I just done? we have this vision of, we see a South Africa where every young, vulnerable child can get the best possible start in life. That's what we want to do. And our mission is we want to transform the lives of young children, their caregivers, and communities through compassion, collaboration, and capacity. And, and this is what we've been doing. So we took the nurturing care framework that I just showed you, and we looked at how we could play a role in each of those areas. So under nutrition, we do preschool feeding and household feeding. We work with KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken. Okay, we don't hand out Kentucky Fried Chicken, but they give us almost $1 million a year to feed children. We're feeding 23,000 children a month. And Gloria, my team member, is here in the room, and she's leading that great work. In terms of responsive parenting, we run support groups, which I'll talk briefly about in a second. Under safety and security, we run child protection programs and gender-based violence programs, and we make sure that we're referring to social services and health services and even legal services where necessary. Under learning and stimulation, we're helping a lot of preschools. It's not just the fact that they have 4 walls, but the quality of the education that they're providing. So we're helping them with infrastructure and material support. We run play groups, and we have toy and book libraries. And then under health, we do a lot of health education. We're doing child development screenings. We do a lot around HIV, and we do referrals as well. So we are now in 7 provinces across the country and in 22 different sites, mainly urban, very poor settings, shanty towns, that kind of thing. And this is where we're working. We have teams now working in all these areas, working with partners, working with government to make this happen. And in terms of parenting, we've realized because so few children are able to get to preschool, they cannot afford $25 a month to get their children to preschool, because that is the social welfare grant that they're getting. And so they have to ask themselves, what do I do with this little money I get? If I put my child in preschool, we don't have food on the table. I cannot pay rent. So these children are unfortunately at home or with a childminder, and they're sitting at home. And so what we've done is we've developed a parent support group strategy that allows us to, within a community, get a number of parents together and actually train them on how to stimulate and nurture and provide the right nutrition to their children. And so we've got these groups going all over the place. They run for 3 hours, twice a month. We have a special curriculum that is getting accredited by government. And we run these in the local community centers, churches, libraries, wherever we can find space. And they're actually facilitated by parents who've come through the program. So it's the parents who are actually facilitating the sessions. And then we train them up in this, what we call PSG, Parent Support Group curriculum. And the curriculum actually looks at a number of key areas. But we start off initially with the parent themselves. How are you doing? You cannot give love when you don't feel loved. You cannot give to your child. You cannot, pay attention when you're struggling and you're living in toxic stress. And so we help them with self-confidence and self-esteem. Then we talk a lot about positive parenting. So we start with the me, then we talk about the we, the relationship between me and my child, around positive parenting. And only then do we get into key topics around early childhood development, health, nutrition, gender-based violence, whatever it may be, HIV. And so this is a key component of our program, making sure that we're dealing with the parent, the relationship, and then we're giving the parents the knowledge and skills to really know how to nurture their children. So, answer to another question. When we talk about positive parenting, we explain to them that there are different parenting styles. Some of these are harmful. Most of them are harmful in many ways. And really what we're trying to promote is this responsive or authoritative parenting. And you can see that in the top right hand, which really, in a summary, it's represented by a lot of love, a lot of nurturing, but also there are boundaries that have been set. We know that in South Africa, there's a lot of child abuse and maltreatment of children. When we start asking questions around child maltreatment, and we ask parents, how many of us have beaten our children? All the hands go up. I was actually walking down the road not too long ago, and a mom had a child on her back, and the child was crying. The child must have been 6 months old. And the mom picked up a stick off the ground and started beating the child over her shoulder across the face. And I intervened, but this is typical. And so it's critical that we explain to them how parenting styles actually affect brain development. And when parents get that, they go, oh my goodness, what I'm doing with my child is actually affecting their future. So it's really important we do that. And then what we do is we have a number of instruments that we use to measure our impact. So around caregiver well-being, we're using two tools. One's called a parental stress assessment. Another is a maternal depression score. In terms of the child caregiver bond, we're using a tool called the Piccolo. I'm not going to get into that, but as well as the child maltreatment score. And then we're using something from the US, which we've adapted, called the ASQ3, Ages and Stages Questionnaire 3, that looks at child development and child developmental delays. So this is the tool, and it basically measures development across 5 areas: communication, gross motor, fine motor, problem solving, and personal social. And within 30 minutes, we can get a good idea of how this child is developing. And we'll map out their scores on this grid, and that will then prompt the care worker to know what to do and how to stimulate, whether they need to refer to a health facility or a pediatrician. So what we've seen, because of this program, so parents will go through this program for 6 months, and we track and assess their progress. And so what we've seen is, we've seen parental stress come down. The situation hasn't changed. They're still living in a shack. But the fact that they're coming together and they're able to talk and learn is bringing down their stress. We're seeing the relationship with their child improve. We're seeing more teaching and affection and responsiveness and encouragement. These scores are going up, and they're getting more engaged, and that has benefits to the emotional connection. Just recently, we looked at our ASQ scores, child development scores. We just did a recent evaluation this year, and what we're seeing is across all the domains, we're seeing improved scores, which is really, really exciting, and decreased developmental delays. So we're trying to help children catch up and make sure that they get to school ready. We're doing a number of other things. We're tracking things like nutrition and social protection, child protection, and making sure that they're getting the benefit. When we ask mothers, where are the fathers? What do you think they say?
At work.
Nowhere.
Nowhere.
Nowhere. In fact, 60 to 70% of children growing up in South Africa are growing up fatherless. It's the moms who are raising the children. So we've started a program to involve dads. We don't call it a support group because dads don't like support group and talking about emotions and how you're feeling. We call it a men's forum. We talk about manly things. And so we're pulling in these men into the program and helping them understand their importance in child development. And we're seeing more and more men joining the program. I love this. This is a dad and son, and this dad was saying, my children now can say, hi, Daddy, and now I can say, hi, darling. Isn't that amazing? How about this picture? Okay, so this is unique. Here's a dad doing the dishes and helping out with the baby. I mean, I don't know about how many dads in here, okay? But this is amazing to see that we can actually transform the future of these children by helping the parents and understanding their role in nurturing their children. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Carmen, my colleague. So this is what's going on in Africa. We're working in a number of countries, and we are working together with Carmen right here in the US, and we've got a very exciting program that she's been piloting called Parents Plus. I'm going to hand it over to you.
So, gosh, I do something with this thing? Is that better? Yeah. Okay, there we go. I'm not used to this. But I sat in a class with Marc and the other Marc, and I listened to the early childhood development work that they were doing in Africa, and I was floored, partly because I was doing my master's in program design, and I could not believe the integrity, the thoroughness that they designed this program with. So it's so neat. I don't know how many years ago that was, but it's so neat now to be on this end, and I truly feel like I get to work with my heroes. We get on a phone call and I hear Marc's voice and I have to like remind myself, my goodness, this is, I can speak, you know, this is my hero. so I really, this whole program is very close to my heart and so well done. So my husband and I, my family and I, returned from La Paz, Bolivia about a year ago. And when we returned to the United States, the U.S. chapters were really hoping to design an ECD program that took a lot of the best practices from the program in South Africa and create a program here in the U.S. that our chapter directors could deliver. So the big difference between our U.S. chapters and a lot of our global chapters is that the U.S. chapters are run solely by volunteers, except for, of course, our U.S. corporate staff. And so what our individual chapters are able to manage and deliver may look a little different than maybe a chapter with full-time staff. So we wanted to create a program, especially with the amazing, just very sad need for ECD in the U.S., that a chapter could take and from beginning to end have all that they need at their fingertips to deliver a successful program. So we created something called Parents Plus, and I love this quote. Many of you may be familiar with it. It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And that's our goal, is to really build strong children in the U.S. and around the world. To get used to using this thing. So, you know, if you were just in the general session, you just heard me talk about these ACEs, right? Adverse childhood experiences. We won't spend a long time on them now, but it is important to understand ACEs and toxic stress when we talk about the need to focus on early childhood development. So we'll go through those. So ACEs, various forms of physical and emotional abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. There are more than these three. The Kaiser Foundation actually identified over 300. What they have done is, in order to categorize and simplify, they put them under these three categories. I encourage you to do some research if you'd like the full list. So how do they affect us? They affect us in so many, many ways. Increased risk of heart disease, diabetes, obesity, depression, substance abuse, poor academic achievement, and even early death. Is it no wonder that our children, who are trying to figure out how to survive their home life, can't walk into a classroom and pay attention in their math class? I mean, they're not thinking about how to add or how to read. They're still back in that room with that father or that mother and trying to figure out survival. So we really need to start within the home, to name a few. So there's something called toxic stress, which is really what ACEs delivers. And there's something called positive stress. Positive stress is really healthy for our children. Positive stress helps them to problem solve. It can actually increase confidence. It can increase efficacy. It involves things like a brief increase in heart rate or mild elevations in stress hormones. And then hopefully, with the guidance of a supportive relationship, those stress levels return to normal, and it only strengthens the child. Tolerable stress is your serious temporary stress responses. So these are our children that maybe, you know, they could go through things in the home, but they're also our disaster relief children. Children whose lives were otherwise uninterrupted before the wildfires or the floods or the hurricanes hit their homes. So there are a lot of the children that we're working with in Spark, but they have supportive, nurturing relationships that are helping them navigate through these stresses. And then we have our toxic stress, which is that what we talked about this morning, that bear in the room that never goes away, that stress that eventually exhausts the body, that exhausts our coping techniques. And that's the stress that we really want to minimize in these children's life. If you look at the nurturing care framework, which Marc showed earlier, you can see that each of these things can actually reduce or eliminate toxic stress. If you don't have these components present in your life, then that's when toxic stress occurs. So it's not even so much as what you go through, as much as how is it handled and who is there to help you through it. The nurturing care framework has the 5 areas that Marc mentioned earlier. What we decided within the US, the 2 areas that we felt like we could really tackle, that we could present to our chapters, is responsive caregiving and opportunities for early learning. So the goals of the Parents Plus program is to provide a caregiver with tools to increase the intellectual and emotional development within their child. That's that responsive caregiving. To build connection between the caregiver and the child. That's again the responsive caregiving. And then the early learning opportunities, to promote opportunities for early learning within everyday activities through super simple practices. And then finally, to engage the trusted members of our local churches to facilitate mutually encouraging relationships. So one thing about the Parents Plus program is that this is not a program that we go into the community and we deliver outward. This is a program that we deliver to parents both within our churches and out of our churches. Our parents within our churches need this information just as much as our parents in the community. The beautiful thing about this is that it allows our parents, both with and without, with and within, out of the church and in the community, to learn side by side and to share their experiences with each other and to mutually support each other. The activities involve, it's a series of educational sessions with parents and caregivers, but also with the children from local congregations and communities. So it's actually designed for parents to bring their 0 to 5-year-olds to the program with them. We have a Harvard-based curriculum, and we offer that alongside the best practices that we've learned from South Africa that we're able to implement here also. And then finally, there is a focus on training our facilitators. So if you facilitate this program, there is a certain amount of training that we want each facilitator to go through to better understand early childhood development and better understand how to work with parents. Being a parent, if any of you know, is a very vulnerable position. And so these parents are offering themselves up for input and how to be sensitive to that. The sessions, these are the names of the sessions. The first is called A Child's First Teacher, Maximize Love, Reduce Stress, Singing, Talking, and Pointing, Count, Group, and Compare, Play, Move, and Explore, Read, and Discuss, and then at the end, for those chapters that just want to throw it in there, a big celebration for the parents that have made it through. So, I just love this picture. This picture makes me laugh every time I look at it. So how do I begin an ECD and or Parents Plus program? One thing that we have discovered, so we designed this program earlier this year, and then we piloted this program in a number of chapters, and we learned a lot. In order for a program such as this one to be successful, we really found that there needs to be 5 things present. First, you need the support of your church leadership. So that would be the first place to begin. If you'd like to start a Parents Plus program, is to go to your church leader and ask them, is this something that we could do? Is this something that our church could need? Could this benefit both our community and our congregation? 2, you need a champion. So hopefully right now I'm looking at a room full of champions, but you do need a champion in your community to own this. And the thing about these programs that we want to encourage is that Hope staff really wants to walk side by side these champions. So if you choose to deliver this program in your community, we want to be there with you and for you, with any questions, to call, to consult, as much as you need to successfully run your program. You need capacity. So there are some resources that are needed for this program. There's printouts. We would like to encourage healthy refreshments, because that could be a great teaching opportunity. What kind of food is good to eat for snacks? You may need a slight, rental fee or things like that. So it's very important to look at a budget for this program. The other capacity is your volunteers. If your church has 6 programs, maybe currently you lack the capacity as far as volunteers to run this program. And that's okay, because what we find with all of these programs is that God is in control. And so when it is the right time for your church to run this program, it will happen. Community need. Speaking around to your community, going to your Head Starts, going to your different organizations that serve children and talking to them. Hey, we have this program that could really support your parents, that could offer some really valuable tools towards increasing connection and offering these learning opportunities. Is this needed? And really assessing your community need. And then finally, communication. So simple, but so necessary, really within all of these areas. With your community leadership, the champion is really that driver of communication, communicating with your volunteers, communicating with your community resources. That communication, as simple as it sounds, really can make or break a program. So next steps. Marc and I definitely want to invite everyone in the room. We're going to stay in this room. We're going to have our lunches here and sit. And we want to invite anybody who'd like to join us for a question and answer session to really talk through these programs.